Sally. Now I'm going to pass the words to Michael Markie, who is the director publisher of F1000, and will explain us this new platform just launched last month. That is a very great open venue for all the publication and all the research output for the beneficiaries of Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. So, Michael.
Yes. Can you see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much, Julia, for inviting me to talk a little bit more about Open Research Europe, and indeed how Open Research Europe is something that we're hoping, working with some of our partners, can help early career researchers publish research, but also help them get involved in having a say about how open research and open science should happen. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the vision first. So Open Research Europe in a nutshell is a publishing platform, which I'll talk about in a lot more detail in a second, but it's run by the European Commission, who put out a public procurement for this publishing platform in 2019, and F1000 Research, being the lead bidder, worked very closely with the Global Young Academy, LIBA, and also Eurodoc, who are subcontractors, and we won the bid. So we put something in together where we thought we could make real progress by providing the publication platform, but also to help with the communication of the platform, and most importantly, the sustainability of the platform. And so the platform launched on March the 29th. It's already published many articles from the Horizon 2020 projects, and more we've been asked about other funding streams outside of the Horizon projects, if they can publish on the platform. And what's also been really exciting for us is that even other funding agencies have asked about maybe potentially using Open Research Europe to support their own funding streams. So it's been a very, very popular launch, and I'm just going to go through a little bit of the reasons why the European Commission wanted to have a publishing platform. So the first thing is it wanted to create a highly quality and reliable and efficient publishing venue for Horizon Research. So Horizon 2020 finishes in June and will be followed on by Horizon Europe. And what the Commission wanted to do is to have an optional venue where their grantees could publish post-grant, but also during grants, so that they could meet their open access obligations. Now, this is very, very important, as obviously when grants end, it's sometimes difficult to then have the funds to make the work open access if you need to publish it under a gold open access route. But what this platform also does is it won't charge authors any price for an article. So all the costs are covered centrally by the European Commission. And this platform, in essence, is a place to really ensure that all the work that is done under the Horizon programs is made available to the public and also to the citizens of Europe who have paid for that research too. So it's a really ambitious project, and a little bit what Johan and Sally was talking about around, you know, the business models and changing, that the way we do business is changing. The European Commission are very much behind this. So they also wanted to create a publishing platform that's a little bit different from a journal, again, which I'll discuss a little bit later on. But they really want to operationalize open science, which is a really big principle of the Commission's. And they want to ensure that open peer review and open data and the early sharing of research can be supported. Again, as we've just talked about, you know, what is a fair price for the cost of an article? And so F1000 worked very closely with the Coalition S price transparency framework. So we had lots of workshops at the start of 2020, And what we've done is we've completely laid out exactly what those costs cover. And I'll just go on to that into my next slide. So, we were talking about what is a fair price a minute ago. The price for all the articles on Open Research Europe is €780. And what we did in the workshop, the price transparency workshop, was look into these, what we call 8 service buckets or service areas of what happens with our articles. And we've broken it down into the costs of the peer review management, the pre-publication checks, the platform infrastructure and development. And so online, we're very clear exactly how much articles cost and what that cost is, or what that price is for. And so we're one of the first, I think Open Research Europe is one of the first publishers to completely publish this online. Everyone can have that information. There is nothing to hide with regards to price. And so other reasons why we've got the platform as a publishing service. So as I mentioned, immediate open access is very important to the Commission, and this is a platform that enables that with content licenses all being CC BY and CC 0. So it enables the reuse of the work. Open peer review, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but enables the peer review process to be a little bit more civil and enable more collaboration on improving research rather than rejecting research. And also the platform itself is going to be very connected up to institutional repositories, ensuring that all authors have ORCID IDs. And the idea is that the platform itself will become a place where you can easily find and search published research. New generation metrics. I think the most common question we've had since opening a help desk on Open Research Europe has been, what is the impact factor? And that's the biggest question we have by far, and something I'll cover a bit later on as well. But what we're trying to do here, and the European Commission are definitely moving away from just simply judging a researcher by where they've published. They want to focus a lot more now on what they've published and the impact of that actual article. So each article on Open Research Europe has a dedicated metrics page where you can easily demonstrate the impact of that individual piece of work. And as mentioned, this is not something that's new. F1000 has worked with the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation and the Irish Research Health Board on similar platforms to support funders, ensuring that their fundees have a chance to make sure things are published open access. And they've been hugely successful. The Wellcome Open Research platform itself is now the most popular publishing venue for Wellcome funded researchers. And they've really embraced publishing in this way because of how easy it is, because there is no cost to them, and because they can see the benefits of making all of their research data open. So what is another good feature about this platform compared to specific journals is it's a platform that supports all subject areas, so all the areas that are covered by the European Commission, such as the STM subject areas, the social sciences, but also the humanities as well. And there's lots of different article types which enable people to be able to share all of their research. I think we all know that research doesn't come out as a very pretty story every single time. Sometimes we have to do lots of experiments to get the results that we hoped or we expected. This means tweaking lots of methods. It means producing lots of data. And so all of these are valuable outputs that sometimes don't see the light of day. And so the platform itself has been built around specific article types to enable researchers to share and get credit for all of their research, not just the research story that tells the story that people should expect. So the idea here is that the platform itself is to really support researchers publish whatever they would like. So the difference of Open Research Europe compared to a journal is that articles first get published as a preprint. So articles undergo some pre-publication checks. They're then published as a preprint, and that happens very quickly. So on average, that will happen in around 7 to 10 days. So when I say when articles undergo a pre-publication check, there are a few things that happen that are different to a traditional preprint server. So something like bioarchive or archive, where an article gets published on the preprint server after a check to just check that it's in scope. medRxiv does some more stringent checks. But what the editorial team at Open Research Europe do is really give thorough checks to all the articles that are published, because once it's published, it can't be sent to another journal for publication. So what happens is, upon submission, authors are assessed to see if they have the correct funding information for that platform. The article is checked to be in scope, and it's also run through some plagiarism software to ensure that the article is original. So once it passes that step, then our editorial team will do some really comprehensive checks, looking at reporting guidelines. So for example, if a study has used any animals, has it made sure that they are working to the ARRIVE guidelines, which are a standard for animal models. And same in all different subject areas, we will look at all of the guidelines and the ethical guidelines and make sure that the articles are adhering to those. The platform also has a mandatory open data policy, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But what the hope is that all data underlying an article is made freely available in a repository or a subject-specific repository. And to do that, our editorial team work very closely with the authors to help provide information of where this data can be stored, how to write a data availability statement, and how to make sure that all the data and software is fair. So when I say fair, I mean findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So once all of that's done, we then have a production team that makes sure that all of the articles are put into text and data mining formats. So the HTML, the XML, the PDF, so that when people do want to use this and machines want to use this, it's very easy to do so. We also do the proofs and editing of the articles before they're published. And then we also check on all of the multimedia, the images, the citations, making sure that they all resolve correctly. So there's quite a lot of work that goes in to that. But as I said, that takes around 10 days. And then once that's happened, we then publish the paper. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the data and software availability. So as I mentioned, it's a requirement, but there are, with regards to the Horizon 2020 guidelines, at least, there are some ways where you don't have to share the data, and that's due to confidentiality or security or privacy reasons. So I think what everybody says, and is one of my favorite phrases, it's as open as possible and as closed as necessary. But we work very closely with authors to ensure that we give the right level of availability. So once an article is published as a preprint, it then undergoes peer review. So as soon as it's published, the editorial team of Open Research Europe will start inviting reviewers to review the paper. Now, the reviewers are chosen or selected by the authors. The Open Research Europe editorial team do very strict checks to ensure that there's no conflicts of interest, and that the reviewers that have been picked are diverse, they're global, and they also have the correct expertise to review a paper. And so when we talk about open peer review, what's happening here is that we're having open identities. So all the reviewers who review must provide their name and affiliation. They must identify any conflicting interests. The report itself, so the review that the reviewers write, that is published alongside the article. And then there are also opportunities then for the reviewers to have something to cite, so they can cite their own review. It gets its own DOI. It also has its own metrics, so you can see how much the peer review is being read. And what we've seen over the past few years is that one of the first things that authors do, readers do even, is to look at the peer review reports before they read the article. So the peer review is very important in the context of an article, and we try and make that as clear as possible to the audience. And what we also ask the reviewers to do is provide what we call a status, an open review status. So there's three statuses that can be chosen from. One is an approved status, which basically means the reviewer feels that the article is of a high quality and that there's only a few minor changes needed. An approver of reservations, which is pretty analogous to some major revisions needed. So something needs addressing, like changing a figure or explaining an area. And then we also have a not approved status, which is when the reviewers think that the article is flawed in some way and that the authors must make some real big changes to the article before they change their status. So that peer review process goes on until we meet a threshold of peer review. And when I say a threshold of peer review, we've agreed with indexing databases such as Scopus and PubMed and all the other major databases that you have to get a certain threshold of peer review in order for us to be able to send the articles there to be indexed. And so what we've agreed with those databases is you either have to have 2 approved statuses or 2 approved with reservations and an approved. So I'm going to show you some examples of how it works in real life. But the idea is that authors can revise their papers based on what the reviewers have said. They can talk with the reviewers and have a conversation with the reviewers because it's all online. Everybody knows who everyone is. And we've created a functionality to encourage discussion rather than trying to get the reviewers, typically in a journal, an academic editor is the one who makes the decisions. Open Research Europe has no academic editors making decisions. The decisions being made are between the authors and the peer reviewers. And what we've seen is that brings the authors and the reviewers closer. They have more conversation with one another, and they both understand that the goal of publishing on Open Research Europe is not to reject an article, because an article is already published. The reviewer's job is to help the authors improve their paper. And that's what we see. There's a lot more constructive reviews openly, and we also see authors and reviewers working together to improve papers. So I'll just give you an example of what a preprint version looks like. So on the screen here, you can see in the title, it's very clear that we say that it's the first version of a paper and it's awaiting peer review. And on the right-hand side of every article, we have the open peer review box. And here is all the information about the peer review. And in the next slide, you'll see some actual peer reviews. But here again, we're very clear that an article is awaiting peer review. So this is what happens when the article gets published after around 10 days. It goes live on the site and it's clearly labeled that peer review is underway. So here's another example of an article that has been through some quite rigorous peer review. So in the title again, you can see this is a second version of a paper, and you can also see the status of that peer review. But on the right-hand side is where you can really see how this paper has developed over time. So the first version of this paper was published in April, and there was 4 reviews that came in for that, and all 4 of the reviewers had some reservations about the paper. So they, as mentioned, thought that there were some key revisions that need to happen in order for that paper to pass the peer review threshold. So the author went back, did some changes based on what the authors and the reviewers had said, and they published a second version a few months later. And as you can see, reviewers can then change their statuses. So in the done.
So looks like we had an issue with connection.
Are we back?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's continue. That's fine.
Excellent. So here's an example of the open peer review process. So
Michael, sorry, could you please share your screen once again, because we can't see this.
Okay, hang on. Are we back? We're back.
We are back, perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just go back to where I was. So yeah, here are a couple of examples of a peer review report. So here we can see reviewers, what the reviewers said, and it's very clear that they've said this is a well-written manuscript, but these are some changes that I want to make. The authors then in the second panel has had a real big conversation with the reviewer where they're having a discussion about some of the points. Now this sometimes doesn't happen in a traditional journal sense because the editors make a decision based on what has been said by the reviewers. But here, taking the academic editor out, you see a lot more collaboration, as I've mentioned. And we also have an amendment box on each version, which summarizes what the changes have been made. So also with the open data examples, just wanted to show a very, very clear data availability and software availability statement here on this article, where all of the underlying data has been put into repositories. So here they've used Zenodo to a general repository to support lots of the research, but then they've also put some extended data, so some really cool videos of cells that are a video file which is stored on Figshare, and then all the software availability that's available from GitHub. So what we've done here is that the editorial team has worked very closely with the authors to ensure all the underlying data is completely available for everybody to use. So that's how the model works, but I wanted to in particular just focus a little bit of time on how we think that Open Research Europe and this publishing model supports early career researchers, and also just to have a little, just give a little feeler for what we're hoping to do over the next few years of this project, particularly working with the Global Young Academy and Eurodoc, who are really hoping to champion this way of publishing to early career researchers. So, you know, a lot of the questions that we get asked on help desks and when I give talks to groups is, you know, why should we publish here, particularly as it's a new journal or a new publishing platform? It doesn't have an impact factor. Will what I do or will what I publish here count? Will people be reading it? Will people want to use it? And will my institutions count it as an official article? So I just wanted to go through some of the benefits of what the open research publishing models does for early career researchers, and then I will tackle some of those questions I just mentioned here. So I think in general, as Johan and Sally were also saying earlier, open access is a train that isn't going to be stopped. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, most research will be open access and everyone will be able to get hold of it. And that's how it should be. I think that's how we all want it to be. And I also think when we do get to that stage, there'll be less, you know, I still hear sometimes that people think articles published in an open access journal isn't as good quality as something in a subscription journal, which is completely incorrect. So I think we're on the path to complete open access, but what open research publishing does, it's not just access it focuses on, it also focuses on the underlying openness of the whole process. And so what we found is, you know, publishing as a preprint and enabling the rapid sharing of work is really good for early career researchers as they get to put articles in grant proposals and job applications, provide links and enable those groups to actually go and see, oh, they have published some work. They can see who's reviewed that work and they can also get a general feeling from the article metrics page of how well that work's doing. So preprints are a really good way to declare what work is being done and what is happening. There's also a citation advantage for papers that link to research data. So last year there was a study done across PLOS and Public Library of Science and the Biomed Central journals that showed if there is a data availability statement linking to data, that those articles seem to have more citations than those that don't. Now this makes complete sense because data that is then stored in repositories is also being used and found by many people. And what you're doing there is if someone's looking at the data set and there's a link to an article, you're going to get more people looking at the article, and vice versa. If you've got data in your article, people are going to be very interested in seeing the underlying data between that, and so they go and find the data. So it's very important that research data actually brings more people to reading the papers. As I mentioned, open peer review enables this constructive dialogue. I've seen examples at F1000 Research of groups building new collaborations with the reviewers who have reviewed their paper and have worked on new ideas together because they were able to have a discussion about their own works. I also think that open peer review brings a sense of civility to publishing. I do think that, you know, I've worked across open public peer review and closed peer review, and openness brings out the nice side of people. I think that's what everybody wants. Nobody wants to be really kind of hurt by a peer reviewer and, you know, not really knowing who it is and knowing what they've said. Whereas here, Open Research Europe is like, let's improve the paper, let's work together to do that. And so openness in that sense actually provides a better research environment as well. And it also enables early career researchers to see how the peer review process works. What do people look for? How do people write a peer review report? And then in general, open research benefits society and its citizens. I think particularly in COVID times, you know, I think we've seen with the sharing of preprints on the bioarchive and medRxiv that, you know, we've gone from last year not having a vaccine to now having a vaccine that's being rolled out globally. That wouldn't have happened without open research, the sharing of genome strains and sequences. It just wouldn't have happened. And so by doing open research, you know, everyone who is a researcher and is looking into, you know, particularly if you're working in the clinical sciences, you want to be making real change to the world. You want to be contributing to something. And so I think open research enables that to happen as society can use that research and build upon it. So another thing that I just wanted to cover about for early career researchers are, you know, publications on Open Research Europe is based upon the research itself and not the perceived impact. Too much, I think, impact factor is embedded in a lot of the institutional architecture funders to an extent, although that's changing a lot more. But I think, you know, we're the early career researchers now, and the next generation of researchers, as I call them, they have the ability to change this. Impact factor is not the be all and end all. And I think many researchers will say their best work or most cited and lauded work is not that's published in the high impact journals. And so we really need to work together on proving this, but also working with those stakeholders to change the evaluation system. So I think going forward, and this is something that the DORA principles support, it's also something that more and more funders are also supporting, as Johan mentioned earlier, and that's articles should be based on its article level content and not the place that it's published. In this model of Open Research Europe, authors are in control of their publications from start to finish. So there are no barriers. There are no academic editors who are saying, no, that's not novel enough for this journal. This is where authors have got the work that they want to share, and they're sharing it how they want to share it. So I think it brings a bit more control back to the research community and not the publishers. And again, the publications of all findings should happen, not just the positive ones. I remember doing my own studies, everything was negative, and I felt, oh, I must be a bad scientist. That's not true. You know, sometimes you have to work out that things don't work, and being able to document that and publish that so others don't try and recreate that work is just as important. And so Open Research Europe is very much open to publication of not just positive results, but also negative and null findings, but also findings that might be difficult to share elsewhere in journals that really do rely on novelty. So in my final slide here, I just wanted to mention a little bit of the work that F1000 and Eurodoc and the Global Young Academy and Open Air are doing. What we're looking at over the next couple of years is creating sustainability for this platform from an early career perspective. So what we're going to be hoping to do in the next couple of years is look at creating an early career research advisory board to focus on issues that matter most to the early career researchers. So this is something that F1000 has done very well with the Wellcome Trust. And we have a board of very young, energetic researchers who really help us to identify what the needs are of the early career research community with regards to publishing. And so we're looking at creating a specific ECR board for Open Research Europe. What we have found, and in the image at the bottom, funding agencies and institutes are now having a real big drive for open and collaborative research, a drive towards open data and software, the demand for impact and the demand for access. There's lots of changes that happen all of the time. And I think people who work in the industry or work at funders and publishers, they don't understand that it happens so quickly that things like fair data is not something that everyone is familiar with. For example, I spoke to a lot of researchers who were like, what do you mean by fair data? What is that? So I think, we have to train the next generation about what all of these open processes are. We need to advocate for them, but we also need to really make sure that people know what they need to do and support them in making research open. We also want to engage with not just policymakers, but funders, publishers, and institutions to ensure that we're all making changes together. I think Sally said it properly. Not one group can do this on their own. Coalition S cannot do this on their own. Open Research Europe can't do it on their own. It's about getting all the stakeholders together to ensure that we can do something that can make real change. And then finally, what we also want to do is advise and demonstrate how open research, open access, and open data, etc., can benefit career progression. One of the things that the Early Career Researcher Board on the Wellcome platform has said is, we're really talking and really promoting open research, but are we going to be judged on if we are publishing in an open way? Will people care that I've made my data open? And so, as well as thinking about journal impact factors, we also want these kind of stakeholders to understand being an open scientist is difficult. It comes with having to do lots of work to ensure that everything is in a way that people can reproduce it. So can we somehow create metrics, or not even metrics, or enable researchers and research funders to really say what the benefits of open research are? So I'm going to leave it there, but if you want more information about Open Research Europe, you can send a question into our help desk. You can stay informed and signed up to get the newsletter from online, or you can follow us on Twitter, where we'll also try and answer any questions that anybody has. But that's the end of my presentation, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We received several questions for you.
Brilliant, so, I shall answer them all.
Yeah, so be prepared. Okay, we received a very interesting questions here. Why do we need to publish papers in HTML and not in PDF only?
PDF files are very difficult. PDF files were created for people who like to read. So it was created for other researchers to print off a PDF, and sometimes you want to read an actual article. The problem with a PDF is that it's not very good at being able to be text or data mined. So if any machines want to create and use the literature to provide insight, a PDF can't do that on its own. So that's why we have to create different formats for publishing.
Okay, thanks. I didn't know that. Okay, we have several questions regarding the open peer review and the peer review process. And in particular, it's interesting, this question, because it's very typical from early career researchers. Is it possible to delete a rejected paper?
Can you repeat the question, Julia?
Yeah, so basically what they ask is if in the peer review process, a lot of peer reviewers say that the paper is not acceptable.
Exactly, yes.
What is happening?
So, yeah, I think on Open Research Europe, reviewers can say that. If reviewers feel that the paper is not to a certain standard or it's missing something, then they say it. But in open peer review, they don't say it with a rejection or with this paper is not good enough, you should reject it from your journal. On Open Research Europe, it's different. The idea is that the reviewers are asked, and through their invitation, very clearly says at the top, your role is to help improve this article. And so when they take that, they know that they're going to have to engage with authors to try and improve the paper. So what we've seen is, because everything's open, nobody is as rude as when it's closed. And I think that what people understand is that if they're being open, that they're going to have to collaborate. And I think that's a much better way to do peer review. I've been and seen many occasions where I can give an example of once on a publishing platform that we had a peer review sent in where peer review was like, this work is not good enough. I think the author needs to start again. It's completely not correct. And our editorial team said to this person, you do know that this peer review is going to be open, right? And they were like, oh, okay, let me change my review. And when we published it, it didn't have anything like the same language. It was like, the author has done a good job. This is what the author might want to consider. And so I think what we're also seeing in the research world is, we want the research community to be a nice place to be. We want people to be able to collaborate. And I think by being open and honest, it enables that to happen. So I hope that more and more people choose to do open peer review.
Thank you. And on this, there is now a question. So how ORE is motivating reviewers to do their work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we pretty much do the same thing as a traditional journal. So we invite people to do the reviews. As I mentioned, the authors suggest the reviewers, which we find makes the reviewers want to. It helps if an author suggesting an expert from their field. It's better than someone like a publisher picking who they think is the best person to review. So we actually have quite high acceptance rates. But what we do to incentivize is the review itself is published. So all the reviews get DOIs. So again, on grant applications or anywhere where people are asking, what do you do? What a lot of researchers do is peer review, and it takes a long time. And if you put in 4 or 5, really important comments to improve a paper, then I think you should get credited for it. And so the open peer review enables that to happen. And there's also some view counts on it too. But really, I think what happens for the incentivization is being able to get credit for those reviews. And I do think more and more metrics might change, and your peer review and what peer reviews you have done may count towards job applications, etc.
Thank you, Michael. Still some questions. It's never happened that there were many people that would like to review a paper, like 10 reviewers. It's never happened that.
Right. Sometimes it does. Not 10. That's doing really well. And I think if I was having to give a kind of rough estimate, I think 1 in 4 reviewers that you invite tend to accept. And it always depends on whether they're busy or whatnot. But yeah, if we had 10 people accept, we would publish 10 peer review reports. But the idea, I think, is really there's a big burden on peer reviewers. So even if we got to 2 or 3 reviews and they had passed the peer review criteria, I would let the other reviewers not have to do it, because I think that researchers have to do a lot of work, and adding additional review is not great for anybody's personal health sometimes. So, you know, we do what we can, but if we did get 10, I would be very, very happy.
Yeah, thank you. One question is regarding the ethical standards. So how do you check the ethical standards in ORE?
So the ethical standards, so the Horizon 2020 model grant agreement, so all the grant agreements that all the researchers sign to, there's some ethical policies that must be adhered to, and these ethical policies go across all different subject areas. So if we take the example of if an article was a clinical trial, then the European Commission says that you must have registered that clinical trial in the clinical trials database, and that you must provide the information behind that. So if we got a clinical, what our editorial team will check, they'll see, oh, this is the clinical trial. They look at the policies of the European Commission. And if things haven't met those policies, we would go back to the author and say, you need to do this before we can publish the article. So there's lots of different ethical guidelines, and I think the model grant agreement has about 50 pages covering all the different subject areas. So what the ORE team do is really just understand what discipline the article's in, check that it has these ethical policies, and then works with the author to make sure that that article is meeting all of those policies.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we have now several questions about metrics. Sorry for that. So, will ORE be indexed in Scopus or Web of Science databases?
Yes, so as a new publication, and this is for any journal, you first have to be publishing a certain amount of papers before you can apply to these databases. So all of these different databases like Web of Science and Scopus, they all have their own eligibility criteria. So the application you have to fill out, you have to provide the information about your journal or platform, and then they will assess if they feel that the article should be indexed in their database. So at the moment on Open Research Europe, we're already getting close to the amount of articles needed for us to think about applying for these databases. And so we will do that as soon as we possibly can. So I can't remember all of the details of each database, but for example, once we've met them, we will then apply. Then those databases then depends on how busy they are. Sometimes you will be indexed quite quickly, but sometimes you might be in a queue behind lots of other journals, so you might have to wait a few months. But typically, a new publication will be indexed in Scopus within around 6 months to a year. Web of Science is a little bit longer. I would say about a year to 18 months from the first time that it publishes an article. So I have no doubt that Open Research Europe will be indexed in all of these databases, but it does take a bit of time. So any of our early authors on the platform have done so because they understand that it will be indexed in time. So it's a waiting game, Julia. We have to wait to do that. But ORE, or ORE, as we call it, will be indexed in these databases at some point, and we'll try and do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I have a personal experience also with a paper that I published 5 years ago. It was in a journal that didn't have the high impact factor, and that article was super cited. and the impact factor increased very quickly in a few years. It was surprising. I was so happy. But now we are changing the mindset how to evaluate researchers. So who knows how it will be.
Exactly.
So other question about still metrics. I don't know if you can answer to this question, which is very interesting. Are paper metrics common for all areas of science? Do you think it's fair?
I think all metrics, I think you need as many as possible. So sometimes they cannot be fair. I think the person who asked that question is right, because in certain fields, for example, you have lots more research labs sometimes, and so you're going to get more citations because that field is larger than compared to someone else who's in a small field and there's only small amount of citations. So that's one incidence. Also, the views and downloads can vary depending on region and also depending on how that research is being shared by the authors themselves. So you can promote your article very highly, you can put it on ResearchGate, you can make sure it's in institutional repositories, you can do lots of stuff to make sure that everybody's reading your work, but some researchers might not do that. And so there is a difference as well. So I think we need to get a balance of qualitative and quantitative metrics. I do think putting a number to everything is not the way the world works. I don't think we're all going to be, oh yeah, you published in that journal, so you're 6.5. That's not how everything works. So I think we have to develop better metrics. I know the European Commission has a whole stream on how they might want to do that. And as Sally and Johan were saying earlier, I've also did some work with the Wellcome Trust, who are also looking at how do we value work through a qualitative statement. So has it made a change to policy? Has it helped teaching? Things like this are all important that don't get wrapped up in a metric. And I think a lot of what gets produced and published is not the whole story. And I think what we need to do is be better at telling the whole story.
Yeah, that's right. And I can confirm that even Eurodoc is involved in the discussion about the evaluation of the researchers and the research itself. And I think in few years, we are going to flip the situation. But also it's a hope that everything will get credits for any kind of research output. So let's move on other question. We are full of questions here. Coming back to the ethics, and in particular to the coercive citation, which are malpractices about the reviewer that are often asking to cite their own paper. So do you think that with open peer review, this practice can be cut down?
I think you won't find, and I don't think I've ever seen on an effort. People will still say, I think you forgot to cite my paper, maybe one paper, that's fine. Or I think you've missed out some other really important articles. That's absolutely fine. But I have seen again in closed peer review, you've missed out all 7 of these papers, which are my papers, and make sure you put them in. And, that is bad practice. And I do think that in certain journals that does sometimes still go on. I think more and more people are looking now at reference lists to ensure that it's not happening. And I do think it's a practice that more and more publishers are trying to guard against. But yeah, I mean, it has been used in the past to kind of get a journal's impact factor to go higher. And these little, we've seen lots of peer review rings. So making sure people are peer reviewing one another who know each other, and they're all making sure that all the articles pass peer review quickly and get published in journals. All of this stuff still goes on, but I don't think it's a publisher issue. I think it really is the issue of the publish or perish. I think, the problem is that the hyper competition to get published and make sure research is out there means sometimes malpractice happens. And I think the open peer review is a very good way of showing the whole process and understanding what the reviewer and the author have spoken about. And so to answer your question, I don't think that the coercive references is going to happen during peer review, because I think people will be able to see and really understand, I know what this person's trying to do here. So
I think this is a very good point here. Some of our people are asking what determines the level of acceptability of publication in such open access publishing platform.
So are we talking about the eligibility for Open Research Europe?
I think how many acceptance, probably.
Acceptance. Okay, so that's a good question. I would say acceptance is quite high, because you have to pass it's the checks that make sure that you're accepted, and what the editorial team do help authors get to a stage where they are accepted. So if they need some support with their data, etc., they're not rejected, they're helped to get there. So the editorial team's job is to make sure that the acceptance rate is high. However, we do still reject articles on certain things. So at the moment with Open Research Europe, there's still a little bit of confusion that it's not a repository. So some people have been rejected because they've already published their work. We've had rejections sometimes because authors don't want to share their data, and that's up to them. But that's the policies of the platform. But realistically, the kind of acceptance rate is high, because what we're trying to do is ensure that everybody has the opportunity to publish. So I don't have the specific numbers, but I would say it's definitely 75% or above.
Thank you. That's quite high. Okay, so other question are maybe we can reinforce more what you said before about the Marie Curie Action Fellow, also PhD, that are working in industry. We know that in industry, publishing is not a fundamental point. However, to meet the requirement for having the PhD degree, it's usually asked by the university to publish. In this way, how ORE is helping the early career researchers to publish?
Yeah, it's very important, and with the European Commission, particularly in Horizon Europe that's coming up, there's a lot of research funding going into industry, and there's some big problems that we've got to solve. There's climate change. We've got lots of COVID and all the infectious diseases, and so there's lots of work going in to fund the research, but also the application, the industrial applications of that. And so this platform is completely open to all of the industry fellows to publish here. And it gives that angle to publish different types of research articles. So in industries, it might be a particular application or how something has been, some research has been applied, which might not fit the traditional journal mold. And that's a problem, because if people can't publish in a journal some of the industrial work they've done, then they're going to struggle to meet their institutional needs. And more since been working with the Commission, that I've realized that there's a lot of people in the industry who are doing some really good things and haven't got a place to publish. And so Open Research Europe has already published lots of articles from the industrial leadership requirements. There's also been lots of other articles around the development of industrial size research and work. And so what we've seen is people are publishing individual bits of data. They're publishing reports on how they think particular processes will work. And all of this is important research that sometimes gets hidden. And so Open Research Europe is definitely trying to encourage the industrial students to share this research and get the credit that they need for their own careers. But for the Commission, they're also very keen to ensure that all of the work that they fund is finding its way into the public domain, because important small and medium enterprises and industries are going to be the future of creating the technologies from the research. So we need to support them. That's what we do.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. We have still time for other questions. One of these is that during this last year and even now, a lot of early career researchers are facing difficulties with the COVID-19 pandemic. And since the grant is not forever, unfortunately, they are struggling to publishing, and maybe they don't know what type of publication or research output can see the light in a publishing venue. Would you like to clarify or make some example?
Yeah, I think I touched upon it in my talk. Is not everything is an amazing story. Nobody starts their grant funding, and in 2 or 3 years, or however long the funding lasts, they've got a perfect story where all the data positively correlated something. I mean, that's not how things work. And you know, if you're being stopped doing your project halfway through, or there's been processes, there has been work that's gone on. So, you know, there's obviously maybe potentially a methodology that has been done, maybe a review to see where you're going in that area. And all of this work can be published. And so Open Research Europe, as I mentioned, is publishing lots of different article types. So in particular, paper, we have an article type called a data note, which is different from an article because it doesn't need the introductions or the backgrounds or the discussion. It really is a description of that data, how it was generated and how others can access it and reuse it. And so despite, you know, maybe this data not leading to the perfect story, this data is very useful and you can get a publication for it. And that's the same for methods and protocols. And in the humanities and social sciences, you know, we're talking about things like case studies and systematic reviews that can really help, you know, give you an output from the research, even though you may have been restricted in what you can do. So like I say, I always say this, research is not perfectly formed. It never will be. So I think in some cases, you have to think away from having the traditional research article and having lots of different parts that might make up one article or can better summarize the research that you've done.
Thanks, Michael. We have just 1 minute. Would you like to say any close remark?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my last few slides, and obviously I work very closely with Julia and Alexander too, and I think, you know, we would really like to hear a lot more from early career researchers about what the problems are so we can help fix them, or at least we can do some shouting to try and change some of the practices. But I do think, you know, for me, the next generation of researchers are the ones that are going to carry the open science and open research flag. So let them have a say now, let's everybody, and let them help shape some of the policies and some of the ways that research is being judged. Because if that doesn't happen, we might get the next generation being like the generation we have now. And I think everybody understands that something has to change. Now we're in a digital world and, you know, we can share research by the click of a button. We need a system that supports that. But then we also need to work out how we can also commend and also support researchers in their careers as well. So my finishing statement is, please get in touch with Eurodoc or any of the other early career researcher groups so we can get the right questions to the right people.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And thanks a lot for everybody that are listening today. Today we showed you how to do good science, because practicing open science is just practicing good science, as a friend of mine used to say. I would like to ask Alexander if he has any other final remarks.
No, it was very good, very interesting and relevant. And I would also like to thank Michael for his presentation. And answers to the questions. Looks like we don't have any other questions, Julia. So
Perfect. We can close here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
bye.